Greetings, fellow Gravewalkers, and welcome back to another video. In this video, I will be giving my ideas on a what if Celebrimbor wasn't evil scenario, and what that would look like. So as I always do when talking about any events in the Middle-earth lore, this video will not be 100% accurate to the books, as the games themselves aren't 100% accurate, but that's part of their charm. We're also going to be going between skimming over smaller moments, but going more cinematic for important moments. So let's get into it. But before we get into it, I have a couple more things to say. First of all, being this script sort of evolved from the original idea of just what if Celebrimbor wasn't evil. You can tell by the title that it's now more of a best case scenario situation. Basically, anything that could go wrong was either not as wrong or went right, sort of thing. Basically, the good ending. You know, trying to keep everything of the story at the start, you know, the bit of the setting, that's the word I'm looking for. Keeping the setting the same, but the things that happen throughout it different. And beyond that, my mouse died a few days before I'm recording this, so I won't have another one till Saturday, which I think is the 22nd. So if this video comes out before I get a new mouse, which I'm really hoping to have it out before then, it will not have a huge amount of editing done to it, and it will probably mainly be Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War gameplay. But let's get into it now that I've yabbered for way too long. To begin, we're going to start right at the beginning of Shadow of Mordor's timeline, that being the Bright Lord DLC. The only real change to the Bright Lord would be his mannerisms. His intentions in taking the One Ring would be true, but there's a tiny detail I'd like to bring attention to that I think gives some insight on why Celebrimbor ends up acting the way he does. So I'm actually having to come in and re-record this part as I'm editing it, because I realized I actually made a pretty glaring mistake in the script. Basically, here I said that Celebrimbor's eyes glowed orange during the scene where him and Sauron are making the One Ring, but upon actually looking at the cutscene, which you should have seen already, his eyes stay blue the whole time. So I don't know how I misremembered that, but I was wrong. However, the fact that the intro cutscene does say that taking the One Ring could lead to even worse consequences for Celebrimbor makes me think that my idea here still holds up, that the One Ring is the reason why Celebrimbor turned evil. And in the next paragraph, which is part of the original script, I explain that a little more, but I wanted to come in here and explain why this part seems a little disjointed now. Now, before I talk far too much on the weird intricacies of branding and domination, we're going to get back to Celebrimbor, as I think I'm going to do a speculation-type theory video on that soon. But I would say there's a decent chance that Celebrimbor was influenced by the ring. From Gollum, we know it can happen incredibly fast. He was influenced in mere minutes, so Celebrimbor being faced with this item, something that would allow him to defeat Sauron along with the ring's influence, I definitely could see it getting to him, he nabs it, and flees. I cannot confirm that's why Celebrimbor ends up the way he does, but it does seem very possible, which also opens a can of worms. Would a non-evil Celebrimbor defeat Sauron without Talion? And I'm saying no. Not just to make this video more interesting, but also because Celebrimbor's defeat scene, we see the One Ring leave his finger. It doesn't just slip, it's the ring attempting to get back to its master, like it did when abandoning Gollum. The ring has a mind of its own, and that makes it very dangerous, as it can and will betray any but Sauron. And for those who may be able to control it, it will just make them the next Dark Lord. Which I think also brings it around to Kel, as Shelob says he'll be just like Sauron, except bright. But for this scenario, Celebrimbor would take the ring, but not be influenced by it. It may chew at him like it does Frodo, but it would never get control. From here, Celebrimbor's war is pretty much the same. He may be less overconfident and may take a bit more of the other Elf Lord's advice, but it wouldn't save him when he fights Sauron one-on-one, and he'd be betrayed by the ring just as in the game. Now, for one of my favorite parts of Shadow of Mordor, we have the end of the Bright Lord DLC with his famous line, "Finally, all shall fear me and rejoice," a parody of Galadriel's line, "All would love me and despair," showing a difference in their outlook, but also even more foreshadowing of Celebrimbor's future, as he says this with a tone that's far from benevolent, and it's one of the few times you hear his malice in Shadow of Mordor. This line would be changed somewhat, but would pretty much remain the same. Now, having met Talion, Celebrimbor would not hide that he's the reason Talion can't move on yet. He'd explain all he can remember, rather than hide it. This would have far better effects down the line once they know who he is, as at the start, Celebrimbor doesn't even remember his own name, let alone what he did. Moving forward, they would still go after the slaver and meet the outcasts. Things would go swell with Celebrimbor being on board with their plans, especially the rescue mission that he's mostly unhappy with, and help convince Talion that Ratbag is far from a threat. Not surprising there. Building his trust in the orc stronger and quicker. They would also meet Gollum, and things would be relatively samey, assisting the outcasts, following Gollum, and helping Ratbag. Of course, by following Gollum, they learn who the Wraith is, the maker of the Rings of Power, Celebrimbor. This would bring back many memories and make him wish to atone even more. Things would change again when getting to the hammer. Celebrimbor would explain prior to their encounter how great an asset the Black Captains are and how much knowledge they have. He would greatly stress that killing the hammer outright with no information gained from him would be a waste, and dangerous to their mission. The hammer likely knew where the tower and Black Hand were, and finding that out now would fast-track everything. Unlike in-game where they arrive late and let Ratbag get nailed in the head, they would be already waiting and jump in to save Ratbag. The war chief in this telling, trusting Talion far more, would stick around and assist in the fight. The hammer too would be surprised, not knowing that the Elf Lord would be with the ranger. After a long fight, they would bring down the hammer, and rather than execute him immediately, they would search through his head. They would find he is unaware of the Black Hand's location, but not the tower, as after the siege of the Black Gate, he had returned to his own fortress in the mountains of Ered Glamhoth, across the Sea of Nirn. They would also learn that the Black Hand could influence the minds of his orcs, giving the Elf Lord an idea. They would brand the hammer, taking his mind and making him a follower. The hammer's mind would fall to the Bright Master and be the first of the Bright Lord's army. This would surprise Ratbag, and Talion would explain his situation completely, informing the orc that he and the maker of the Rings of Power were sharing his body. While most of this would go over Ratbag's head, the Ringmaker part would not. He, like many orcs, knew of Celebrimbor making the Rings of Power, mostly due to the Nazgul, whom the orcs may have taken orders from, but did not particularly like. The story especially spread on the fringes of Mordor, like Udun. From here, they would be approached by Lithariel, who would find the Ranger, the Hammer, and Ratbag all getting along rather strange. Much like with Ratbag, they wouldn't hide Celebrimbor, which, to be honest, is kinda stupid to do in the original. Lithariel would inform Talion that her mother wishes to see him, and Talion and Celebrimbor would go with Lithariel, while Ratbag and the branded Hammer would remain and grow forces in Udun to prepare for the siege of the tower's fortress. The Hammer is commanded to follow Ratbag's order, and the Bright Master departs for Nirn. After arriving in Nirn, things would go mostly the same, meeting with Lithariel's mother and hearing what they must do. In this version of events, however, Celebrimbor feels something off with her, suspecting not all is as it seems, but not voicing his opinions. They would continue and meet Torvin in Morgoth's Scar, hearing what he has to say about beasts and assisting him while desperately wanting to finish Celebrimbor's memory. Things would go pretty much the same for Torvin's story, as Celebrimbor was on board with the dwarf anyway. They'd take down the Great Graug, fully learn branding, and take down war chiefs relatively the same. When Lithariel goes to get her mother's meds, Celebrimbor is fine, instead of trying to convince Talion not to. When Lithariel needs to be rescued from Thorband, Celebrimbor is quick to agree. When Talion starts thinking of Lithariel, Celebrimbor is not as harsh as he'd normally be. Rather, he'd tell Talion that their mission needs to be completed before anything else. After the war chiefs are branded, they turn their attention to the tower in his fortress deep in the mountains of Ered Glamhoth. They regroup with Ratbag and the Hammer, who have managed to take most of Udun under their control. They all get aboard the boat set for the tower. Upon arriving, they'd easily cut through the tower's lieutenant and the nemesis they'd made, including a certain Jaws. All would fall in their path, aided by the Hammer. Eventually, they make it to the tower, and although he tries his hand against them, the four manage to defeat him. Much like the Hammer, they got inside the mind of the tower, learning that the Black Hand was going to Nirn to kill those who aided the Gravewalker. They branded the tower just the same as the other Black Captain, then turned their sights quickly back to Nirn, but arrive too late. They get the last vision from Gollum and chase the little scamp off. They then go back to Udun for the final fight against the Black Hand. Unlike the actual story, Ratbag's forces have been putting up a good fight against the Talons, killing 3 of them already. Ratbag leads his war chiefs against the remaining Talons, while Talion and the Black Captains face the Black Hand at the top of the tower. At the top, the Black Hand speaks to Talion.
So, the Elf Lord likes you, and his heart remains pure. An impressive display, Gravewalker, even turning my captains against me. Once this is done, you will both be put to death for treason against our Dark Lord.
To which the tower would reply,
We fight for the Bright Lord! Sauron's darkness may not touch us!
The Black Hand would then engage the battle, attempting his merging shtick, but the tower jumps in the way, taking the hit. The hammer would then bash the hand from behind, knocking him over and restraining him with the help of the tower. He would look at Talion and say,
What now, Gravewalker? You and the Elf Lord take me too? What stops you from being any different from Sauron, I wonder?
Talion lunged forward and Celebrimbor spoke.
Silence! You are mine! Who do you serve?
The Black Hand was struggling, attempting to break free, but then stopped. His eyes changed from the Sauron red to bright, luminous blue. He replied,
I serve you, Bright Lord.
With the hand branded, Talion let go. In the smoldering ashes of Udun, Talion stood on the edge of the Black Gate, looking out towards Mount Doom. He then asked Celebrimbor,
What do we do now? The hand is ours, we can take the fight to Sauron himself. Where to first?
Celebrimbor replied,
We go to Mount Doom. The time has come for a new ring.
That ends the Shadow of Mordor part of the video. Now we move on to the in-between games part, as this time Talion and Celebrimbor already have strong forces. So while the Ranger and the Wraith cut a trail to Mount Doom, Ratbag and his new bodyguard the Hammer will raid outposts and prisons on the edge of Mordor to free prisoners of war and unfairly imprisoned orcs to grow their forces. The Black Hand and the Tower would take control of Cirith Ungol's garrison, and unknowingly hamper the siege of Minas Ithil by getting rid of the Manbreaker war chief. While Talion snuck past Carrock and Gren, the growing army of the Bright Lord, being led by Ratbag in Talion's absence, would take the gate. Leaving some behind, they would continue. A light-moving bulk of the force would follow Ratbag on hit-and-runs, while a small posse would follow the remaining two Black Captains to occupy Cirith Ungol. Splitting up near the ridgeline of the region, Ratbag continued south, making his way to Nirn. This land was full of the imprisoned and oppressed. Their first target was Tharband. It was here Ratbag would meet Ozharto, a very large Olag High and a widely known independent warlord. He was put in chains by a rival gang and sold to the slave-driving orcs of Tharband, one of the worst prisons in all of Mordor, let alone Nirn. Ozharto, hearing of the Bright Lord, was interested, and the Hammer could actually translate what Ozharto was saying for Ratbag. The Olag High would pledge honor to Ratbag for rescuing him, and Ratbag would nickname the Olag Ranger. This band would continue levying forces from the Dark Lord. Meanwhile, the Black Captains were preparing Cirith Ungol for what was to come. The leadership of the fortress, mainly the war chiefs, had no hesitation in following the command of the Black Captains, and the only one who did, the Manbreaker, was killed for disobeying Sauron's supposed most loyal. The garrison of the fortress were expecting the Nazgul from Durthang to move through in the next weeks for their first attack on Minas Ithil, and the war chiefs of the region were planning to move with them. However, the Black Captains in command would tell them to remain in Cirith Ungol, told that they must defend the fortress since Gondorians would likely believe the leadership of the attack would be here, and may come looking for a fight. Now we move on to the Shadow of War part of the video, which will probably be a bit longer. To start, we'll move to the plains of Gorgoroth and Mount Doom, within which Talion and Celebrimbor forge the new ring. With only a minute to admire it, Celebrimbor is spirited away by Shelob, leading Talion to track him down. His journey takes a few weeks, leaving Gorgoroth, climbing the mountains of Saragost, and finally making it to the caves of Cirith Ungol. While he's sneaking in, he's stopped by a war chief assassin who gets the jump on him, knocking him out and dragging him back to the fort. Once into the Overlord chambers, he presents the Black Hand his prize, the Gravewalker, only for the Black Hand to order the assassin to leave. The war chief takes his chance and leaves. The tower then wakes Talion up and they inform him of what's happened in the last weeks, namely the siege of Minas Ithil, as the Nazgul had come through earlier that day. Talion tells him to ready an attack on the Witch King's army while he goes to get Celebrimbor and will catch up. I know I said Celebrimbor wrong, it's okay. There's a lot on screen I need to read. The Black Hand and Tower inform the orcs of the region that them and the Gravewalker are now in a truce, and those that do not abide to serve the Bright Lord will be killed without hesitation. Talion sets out immediately for the cave, and with the way cleared of orcs, there's an eerie silence echoing around the caverns. As he makes his way, he sees Celebrimbor, but not chained up. Rather stood discussing with Shelob the siege of Minas Ithil and the future to come. They have a long conversation, but it ends up basically saying that to get an ending for this war that will be a good one, they must hold Minas Ithil. They would then leave and make for Minas Ithil quickly. When they arrive, the attackers haven't gotten far. Hampered by the Black Captains, the siege leaders are holed up at the gate, pinned by the Bright Lord and Gondor. The ground is scorched and the fires of war burn. Banners of Sauron, Gondor, and the Bright Lord litter the ground, but the host of Mordor has suffered the most fatalities. Talion meets with the Black Captains at the outpost near the pass entrance and discusses the plan. Talion then leaves for the sheer face of Minas Ithil's western wall. With a view of Minas Tirith in the distance, he climbs the ledge and makes his way up, running into Castamir. Castamir immediately knows Talion isn't from Minas Ithil, but also that he's still a Gondorian, a ranger from the Black Gate, judging by his armor, and questions him on the events that transpired, as he only had varied reports of what happened. Hearing of the fate of the Ringmaker and of the Black Captains being on his side, he sends orders to not attack those carrying the blue banner of the Bright Lord. Quickly, the host of Mordor is whittled down, and the Witch King offers a challenge. The Gravewalker may face his nemesis from Udun, a nemesis who should have died at Ered Glemha, Brock. Although they could continue, Talion and Celebrimbor accept the challenge, seeing it as good for morale. The fighter of Mordor is allowed to enter, and his guards remain close as he screams incoherently at all around. Yes, I'm aware I messed up the word incoherently really badly. There's a lot of spaghetti on my screen with really big words that it keeps messing me up, because I am terrible at speaking while reading. He's brought to the Colosseum where they shall fight, and the battle is started. The orc who had only screamed spoke a few words to the Gravewalker, saying, "You believe you killed me at Ered Glamhoth? You thought too soon. I'm gonna repay you for my scars." His left eye was scarred over with a large blade mark on the rest of his face. They fought for what seemed like forever, but quickly started gaining the upper hand. Some of the orc guards attempted to intervene, but 2 were dispatched, and soon Proc was dead, his body cleaved in 2. Proc's guard quickly rushed to grab his body as the Bright Lord gave his speech. The orcs that remained ran for their lives out of the city and cemented the Bright Lord as a power in Mordor. The next morning, the host at the city was finally put down, and the Bright Lord's forces moved back into Cirith Ungol and then south to Nirn to gain control of Bruz. A trusted war chief from Udun named Borgu the Dark was left to control Cirith Ungol. The road to Nirn was long, and many an outpost fell to the Bright Lord in time. Eventually, they arrived in Nirn, and Celebrimbor was eager to test the new ring's power. Scoping out the arena, they see a large Olog of the Warmonger tribe. Celebrimbor believes this Olog to be the best candidate, and they move in to fight him. After they battle, they dominate him. Bruz informs them that the fortress in the region is under the control of a Black Captain, and that another Olog and a less-than-average stature Urk appear to be commanding them. Talion immediately knows it's Ratbag and tells him. They move to Bruz and are greeted by Ratbag and Osharto. Ratbag explains to Talion all that's happened recently, including taking the fortress from the previous denizens. Celebrimbor believes that Ratbag and Osharto could be more useful in other positions, and Bruz volunteers for Overlord. Talion and Celebrimbor decide to give Bruz a chance and make him Overlord. Bruz also brings his gang to act as bodyguards, Baz, Gaz, and Daz. Talion and Celebrimbor let Bruz begin getting the fort in order while they go to the forest, as both sense something unnatural there. Celebrimbor tells Talion that it's the home of the spirit Carnan, and to not disturb the forest any more than necessary. The orcs that lie in the woods give glimpses of their last moments. Eventually, they make their way to Carnan. Celebrimbor attempts to reach out to the spirit of the forest and gets a reply. They ask for them to come in through the hole at the bottom of the tree. They listen to what the spirit has to say about Zog the Eternal, an orc wishing to master death itself and raise a Balrog from the deep. They agree to get rid of him, but not how, as Celebrimbor sees an orc attempting to use a Balrog as an interesting resource to say the least. Of course, dominating a Balrog would be nearly impossible, but the orc himself? Not so much. They arrive in Gorgoroth and find the orc over the Great Pit, dispatching his disciples, being a cakewalk. But Zog is far stronger. Though quickly they get the upper hand on Zog, only for him to flee, but too late to stop Targaroth from rising. As the Balrog came from his fiery pit, the spirit of Carnan appears to assist them. The fight playing out the same, but with them pursuing Targaroth immediately rather than letting him run. The pursuit of Targaroth goes about the same as you'd imagine, taking them to Saragost and ending with the beast drowned in the ice-covered lake. Returning to Carnan, they learn Zog's attempt to rise the dead around Nirnan. The battle goes the same as the prior, and Zog comes back with another idea. Revive Targaroth from the lake. Although he tries, Talion and Celebrimbor manage to defeat him, and unlike the original, the Necromancer doesn't perish. Rather, he's brought into the fold of the Bright Lord, dominated before his death. Karnan is hesitant to allow him to live. However, if he'll defeat Sauron, then it's best for now. Next, they hear whispers of the Chosen, orcs enhanced by the Nazgul. While going to investigate, they run into Eltariel, an assassin of Galadriel. Celebrimbor remains weary of the elf, sensing a less than preferable aura around her. Talion and Celebrimbor interrogate nearby orcs, learning of their use of the Heidir. After purifying them, they thin the ranks of those who could become Chosen, while joined by the elf. Continuing forward, they destroyed the Chosen who were sent to reclaim the Heidir, securing them for good. Next, they would crash a ritual to create more Chosen, killing all the recruits, but before they could continue supremacy against the Chosen, they were called back to Nirnen by Bruz to defend Sharkburs. The host of Mordor tried their hand at taking the Bastion, but with Bruz's leadership and gang, along with the Black Captains, it was swiftly put down. Talion and Celebrimbor commend Bruz on his ferocity and believe they made the right choice in making him Overlord, but are quickly interrupted by Ratbag as he tells them the Shriekers made off with Ranger and a few other captains. Celebrimbor sees this as a prime time to invade Gorgoroth. Bruz readies the fortress's garrison and they move out. While Talion and Celebrimbor are joined by Eltariel to look for the Chosen ritual Ranger was taken to, Ratbag and Bruz commence an assault on the fortress. While Talion, Celebrimbor, and Eltariel are searching through the ruins, they find their followers. They defeat the Nazgul and the Chosen recruits, and their followers are let free. Eltariel, however, is less than excited about how much the Bright Lord cares for the orcs, seeing it as a weakness and that the orcs of Mordor can do nothing but destroy. They would then regroup with Ratbag and Bruz, who had cut a trail through the fortress all the way to the Overlord's chamber, and the Overlord himself was doomed from the start. Gorgoroth was an important part of sieging Barad-dûr, as the bridge led straight to Sauron's front door. Eltariel, however, required them as she'd tracked a Nazgul to Saragast, Saludin. He was planning to create more Chosen, however they found him before he could even begin. Talion banished him back to Barad-dûr, and in the process saw some of his past. The Bright Lord would then command a siege on Saragast, taking the last region of Mordor that was immediately required for supremacy on Sauron. After taking the region, another Nazgul appeared, Helm Hammerhand. With only a short time to prepare, the Nazgul was the biggest concern. Talion and Celebrimbor, joined by Eltariel and the Black Captains, would face him. Whittling him down, Talion manages to banish Helm and getting a glimpse of who he was in life, and that Celebrimbor stood with Sauron as he gave away the rings. Celebrimbor explains that he simply didn't know what the purpose was. He was oblivious to Sauron's darkness. Talion takes this explanation, but not fully believing it. Next, they would encounter Isildur. Facing an army of Gondorians who were killed at Minas Ithil, they managed to defeat him, but not banish him back to Barad-dûr as he flees. With the surrounding regions of Mordor in their control, Talion and Celebrimbor believe that now is the time to launch an attack on Barad-dûr and end the Dark Lord's reign. They call their forces from every fortress. Talion and Celebrimbor headline the assault with Bruz, Zog, Ratbag, the Black Hand, the Tower, and the Hammer as assault leaders. With an eager army and a plan to dominate a Nazgul in place, they move on Barad-dûr over the bridge. As they cut through the onslaught of orcs, they encounter Isildur, who informs them that while they're distracted here, the Witch King moves on Minas Ithil, and the Bastion of Gondor will soon be brewing with darkness of Mordor. Although Isildur fights strong, he's soon overpowered, and the Bright Lord dominates his mind. Isildur joins them and begins fighting the orcs he commanded there. Eventually, they make it to the end of the bridge, and Talion is met with a familiar face, Proc, back from the dead in Minas Ithil. His body cleaved in two, he was turned into the Machine, although he's far from weak now. Talion dominates him all the same. The host of the Bright Lord makes it to the gates of Barad-dûr, and Talion, along with the Black Captains, enter to face Sauron. Although slowed down by the remaining Nazgul, they eventually make it to the top of Barad-dûr and face the Dark Lord. Sauron stands as the last thing for the Bright Lord to overcome, and while the fight is long and arduous, they eventually bring the Dark Lord to his knees. Getting a hold of them, they attempt to dominate him. Sauron says,
You cannot control me, Celebrimbor. You are not strong enough.
Celebrimbor replies,
That is where you are wrong. You shall serve the Bright Lord. May your shadow not mare this world anymore, and it be replaced with light undiminished.
Although Sauron fought back, he too fell under the command of the Bright Lord. To his new master, he would say,
How may I serve you, Bright Lord?
The new Lord of Mordor would reply,
Go! Take the Black Captains and fight the Witch King to protect Minas Ithil. That is the Bright Lord's command.
The former Dark Lord would heed and take his force all the way out through the Black Gate. News of Sauron's fall spread like wildfire across Middle-earth, and the knowledge of a new Lord of Mordor even more. The former Dark Lord left the Land of Shadow out of the gates, and for but a moment a match of darkness crossed his mind, the remains of who he was, and then extinguished by light. And so the Ranger and the Wraith, bound in the Land of Shadow, both of which once wished to leave, now stood stalwart and remained in Mordor, not as its prisoners like before, but now as the Lord of Mordor. The Bright Lord stands victorious over the Land of Shadow. And that brings us to the end of this video. While the script says what if Celebrimbor wasn't evil, I obviously threw multiple other what ifs in, as most of them hinge on Celebrimbor not being nuts. And in my opinion, it spices up the concept, like the Black Captains being dominated, Zog not dying, and Bruz being a good boy. I also left the ending relatively ambiguous, as I think it'd be fun to follow this and see what a dominated Sauron versus the Witch King would end up being like. So if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button down below, as it tells me you like the video, and if you like what I do, don't forget to subscribe for more. With that, I will see you all next time.